and Sol Goodman, the producer of the film.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you all for sticking around. It's not taken for granted.
Wow. You were right. This is not a film to enjoy, but I mean, and I'm sure we'll be thinking about it and chewing on it for a while. I wanted to go back to something you said before we started the film, is you started working on this film. The need to start working on this film arose from a few naive questions that you had. If you can tell us a little bit about what those questions were.
Well, the first person to ask the question was Dror, the director, and really, as a producer, I was privileged to be able to work with someone that came with such a very simple and basic question and stuck to it adamantly for years. And it's really just looking from a side. We were very judgmental, and we saw how the US had intervened in Libya, but they didn't in Syria. And living in Israel, it's very close. You're very exposed to everything that's happening on a daily basis. And that was a very basic and very simple question. And when we started kind of digging into it, it took us back to the 90s when the US did intervene in Bosnia, but did not in Rwanda. And that was the guideline. That was, I mean, why? It blew up into this massive research and digging and talking to all these people. But that was it. Very, very simple.
I read a review of the film which said, and I'm going to push back a little on it, it said the film rubs salt on America's wounds. I did not think, I mean, like you said, you're judgmental, but I don't think you're vicious. There's a lot of respect that you command to, that you give to people you don't necessarily agree with in this film, right?
We came out of the process much less judgmental. We came into the process very, very judgmental, and we came out of the process understanding that we don't have answers. And some people that see the film get frustrated with the administrations, with Obama, with the decision makers. And we had to remind ourselves, and we try to remind people too, that the evil ones are not the people in the film. The evil ones are out there. We're seeing it in the news on a daily basis. They're still out there, and they've upped their game. And it's interesting watching the end of this film. I don't know how many people kind of directly associate this, but Tony Blinken ending the film, talking about the failure in Syria, is now facing Putin in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And they are pushing back. And Jake Sullivan, who's the national security advisor, I think they're pushing back because behind them there's this thing called Syria. And they know that if they don't push back and if they don't put up a fight, and if they don't, then Putin will just keep on pushing. He'll push through Ukraine to wherever else he wants to go. And it's tough.
It is, and it is a very somber film. I wanted to look into the audience and see if anyone had questions. Yes. Let me just repeat the question because we are not passing mics around. The creative decisions behind the music score of the film.
I kind of wondered between me and myself how much of a discussion we're going to get into this evening, because I can go on talking about things for hours, and one of those things is the score. For every Dror, the director, he's very much into psychology, and for every character we interviewed, besides having an 80-page bio and these massive books that we wrote, there was a psychological evaluation of where this person was during these debates. And that came up again in scoring. Everything is touched very particularly. And we had a wonderful opportunity of working with a composer in Germany who brought to the score, I feel, something. We try to mix contradiction. We try to create contradictions. We try to mix like extremes, you'd say. And she was very, very, very different than Dror in her perception of things, and that's what made her interesting for us. And they just kind of walked through everything, each and every emotional moment, and built what they thought was right for it, and then rewrote that and rewrote that and rewrote that for about 2 years.
Yes, sir. So the role of the private sector in preventing genocide.
The film focuses on the decision makers, but in our democratical experiment, it really lies in the people. They make decisions based on the support they have or don't have. And so I think that the private sector is everything. Particularly in business, I can tell you that we went through all the WikiLeaks drops during the Syrian war, and there were a lot of one thing that comes to mind is while Assad was butchering his people, there was a London-based company designing his garden. And, money talks. But when the refugees from Syria flooded Europe, that shook the foundations of Europe, probably caused Brexit, and changed everything for probably quite a while. I don't know if I can say forever. But that's the role of the private sector. If the private sector and each and every person within a democracy isn't standing behind their government and pushing for moral-based policies, no matter how tough they are, then it's just not going to work.
Yeah. So hopes with the film going forward?
That's a great question. I'm fairly extreme in my personal opinions, so I've been asked to keep them at bay as much as possible. But the film is wrapped, amongst others, by Tony Lake, Clinton's national security advisor, talking about the threat to democracies, and it's a real threat. I live in Tel Aviv, and we had elections a few weeks ago, and they didn't end as positively as the elections here, and that's without even going into partisan politics. It's just there are people moving into our government that want to kind of demolish the democratic structure and the legal structure. And it looked like it might happen here too. I think it didn't so far. It's happening in other countries. Democracies are really hard to maintain nowadays. We see that in the UK, we see that in Italy, we see that all over the place. We see Russia pushing really, really hard against Europe and pushing here, getting presidents elected based on their agendas. And so I think that as long as strong democracies are maintained and the people behind those democracies push their governments for moral-based policies, then we can maintain this structure that we have all benefited from living in. And I think that we can't. We kind of tried to make a film that would leave everybody with their own questions, but I hope that we're able to really leave people with questions, with the kind of questions that'll walk them through their own process, and hopefully maintain this kind of structure that we've all been able to grow up in, and it's been awesome. But it's not to be taken for granted.
Yeah, we had a question there. Markers and indicators of genocide in Ukraine basing off of your years of research.
So there's, again, we're filmmakers. Well, at this point, we're very well informed. We weren't for a while. No, but we were lucky because one of our directors of research went to study international law with an emphasis on armed conflict at Harvard, and so he was able to kind of feed us back with under Samantha Power, he was able to feed us back with a lot of terminology. And it's terminology that's not very common. Genocide. What is genocide? So genocide is a very specific thing. So in Ukraine, I don't think there's genocide, but there are crimes against humanity. And by all means, I mean, it's undisputable. I have a picture on my desktop to remind me that that's out there and it's happening, and we can't let it go until it's not happening anymore. It's a terrible picture. And it's classic case of crimes against humanity, without doubt.
I think we're at time. We can do one more question, so I'll go to you. Yes. No, the person next to you. But if you two can combine your questions and make it quick, that would be lovely. The emotional toll of going through that much of archives. And ma'am, if you just want to add on your question, what was your pitch to all the people in your film?
So regarding to the archival research, we drink and we cry. Honestly, I mean, there's a therapist on standby, and the guys and gals at the office have kind of held off on the therapist, but we will kind of have a process when the whole project is wrapped. It's not yet. And but we learned from Prudence Bushnell, who was in Rwanda and spoke about Rwanda. She was the ambassador in Nairobi when it was blown up. And I sat down to talk to her about that one day, how she managed that. And she said, well, I just encourage people to cry when they needed to, and kind of normalize that. And we do. I won't lie. We went through everything in the film is the tip of the iceberg. There's the scene in Bosnia. It's a home video of killing the guys in Srebrenica, and that's a 5-hour tape that we've all watched a bunch of times. Rwanda's tough. They're all tough. Syria. We have one hard drive that we sent to video activists to the Syrian-Turkish border to meet Syrian video activists, and they gave them a hard drive for safekeeping, and they're all dead. So we have the sense of mission to get that out there now, because so that's that process. It's something I can go on and on and on about. It was a huge team too. It was dozens of people. And about how we got them to sit down and actually go through this process, it was an awesome process because we started interviewing, and Dror really insists on long interviews. I mean, 5-6 hour interviews. Like Madeline insisted on starting out with a little less. She wasn't that young anymore. But long interviews, and being very frank, and not trying to get sound bites, not trying to corner them into saying something that we can kind of use against them, but really honestly challenging and debating. And they liked that. And when they like that, they talk amongst themselves. Dennis McDonough had never, with the Clinton people, it was fairly easy. With the Obama people, they hadn't processed it yet when we started approaching them in 2017. The Clinton people they had their narrative set, they could talk about it for hours, they're all in sync. But the Obama people hadn't really processed it yet. Dennis McDonough had definitely never interviewed about this stuff. He didn't want to talk about it. But someone on his side was able to get him to come down, basically saying, if they don't have our side of the story, they're just going to tell the other side of the story. And he came down and he was confronted. And he appreciated it. He appreciated it because, I'm sorry, we didn't bullshit him. We came very, very, very well prepared, and just really were very matter of fact. And the next day, Dror and I were sitting at the Starbucks at 17th Street in Washington, D.C., and I feel someone smack me on the back, and I look up. Dennis McDonough is hanging out and asking us when he can come back again. So he was really short with us. He didn't want to do it. He wasn't very flexible. That once he kind of went through the process and he realized that we're okay, he offered from himself to come back. And then we met him at that same Starbucks again with Derek Chollet, that was also in government. And he told Derek that he really should come talk to us about this thing because and his words were stand-up guys.
Well, thank you for being stand-up guys and
Thank you.
gifting us this film. We'll be talking about it for a while.
Thank you, Beth. Beth worked with us on this film. She's out there asking questions, pretending like she doesn't know me.
Well,
But
big hand for Beth.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming out tonight.